Imagine this. You're running across the vast expanse of America, day after day, covering over 3,000 miles. The open road stretches ahead. Your body aches. Your mind battles fatigue, and yet you keep moving. What drives a person to push through such extreme physical and mental barriers? What does it feel like to endure miles of heat, pain, and exhaustion on this kind of journey? Today on Ageless Athlete, we dive deep into these exact questions with Marshall Ulrich, a man who's done what most of us can barely imagine. Marshall has not only run across America, but he's also finished the infamous Badwater Ultramarathon through Death Valley not once, not twice, over 20 times, set records, and climbed the seven summits, including Mount Everest. And he didn't stop when he hit his 50s or even 60s. He's still out there pushing boundaries at 73. But this conversation goes beyond the miles. Marshall shares some incredible insights into the mental and spiritual side of endurance. He talks about moments where pain becomes so overwhelming that he learned to disown his body, and even describes an extraordinary out of body experience while running through the desert, a state of mind where he felt like he was watching himself run from above. We also explore how pain and suffering, rather than being obstacles, are tools that Marshall has learned to work with, helping him push past perceived limits. He discusses the beauty of solitude, the spiritual awakening of running under starry skies in the desert, and how embracing discomfort can unlock parts of yourself you never knew existed. Marshall's story is amazing. Thank you for joining me on Ageless Athlete Podcast. This is your host, Kush Khandelwal. Excited to bring you another great episode this week. Get ready because this conversation is packed with wisdom from one of the most extraordinary endurance athletes alive today. Here we go.
I had some banana bread in the lovely city of Evergreen, Colorado. That's right here in the United States. It's up in the mountains at about 7,400 feet. So I always like places with a little bit of altitude and a drier climate. So, it's perfect here, and it's probably 65, 70 degrees.
Banana bread sounds delicious. Did you bake it yourself? And then do you have a secret recipe? I find that I do eat a lot of banana bread.
Yeah, so to answer that, I have, cooked it myself, but Heather, my wife, has developed quite a good recipe, and I like a lot of walnuts and stuff in it. Plus, it's got sort
Mm.
of a crumbly crust on it. So it's a little bit different, but she's got it fine tuned to my taste, which I appreciate greatly.
Sounds delicious. I like to add walnuts, and I've also started adding cacao powder to make it chocolatey.
Sure, of course. No, I
Great.
got it. I've even been known to throw chocolate chips in there.
Exactly. I feel like you can do so much with just a basic banana bread, right? You can really tailor it to your preference, and yeah, your choice of residence seems apt, given that being able to live in altitude probably has allowed you over the years to train with the rarefied atmosphere that allows for, let's say, better training, greater output. Sounds like it was a conscious choice perhaps to live where you do.
Yes, it was. And we originally, this is about 20 years ago, we moved up to what is called St. Mary's Glacier, which is about 20 miles from here. So it's in Idaho Springs. It's very close. And we moved down out of altitude because that was at 10,400 feet. I would use that as a training ground to train people because the glacier has snow on it year round. So I could train people to go up into the mountains, right in my backyard. But my wife had a series of headaches and things like that that kept reoccurring, and we determined that it was because of the altitude. So we moved down 3,000 feet to about 7,400. So anyhow, that suits us a little bit better. But you're absolutely right. I had moved to altitude intentionally because I liked the drier climate, and also I had access to the mountains right in my backyard.
I have spent, I should say, a fair amount of time at altitudes over 10,000 feet, with climbing and hiking trips. But the idea of living year round at that altitude sounds a little bit daunting for perhaps some of the reasons that your wife also couldn't get acclimated. Taking a step back, though, Marsh, please tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Going way back, I started a business in Fort Morgan, Colorado, which is out on the plains, and it was a rendering business. So what I do is I dispose of the cows that had passed away in these feedlots, and it was a packing plant basically that I started when I was 23 years old. So and we what we did is we manufactured ingredients that go into dog food. What that is just basically beef. Still to this day, we sell to the canners, like Alpo Carnation, some of the bigger ones. So, that was my business. And, just to kind of dive into the history just a little bit, one of the reasons I got into running, because at 28 years old, and I actually addressed that in my first book, which is called Running on Empty. But it kind of delves into the story of my wife got cancer, my first wife at 28 years old. At 30 years old, she passed away. But in the interim, those 2 years, my blood pressure had gone way up. And so I had to figure out a way to control it. And the doctor said, we can give you medication or you can try exercise. And I thought, well, I'm going to start running. So that is why I started running. It was more out of, you know, just improve my health. And, I was on a slippery slope. So, and lo and behold, it did help. It lowered my blood pressure. And what I discovered that, I was pretty good with it. So I started to do marathons, 10Ks, things like that. Almost immediately jumped into the marathoning, and then about 1986 or so, I started doing ultra marathons, and I've done a variety of those all over the world. And the other thing I got into, just because I like a little bit of variety in my life, I'd always thought about doing some mountaineering, so I started dabbling in that and adventure racing, like the old eco challenges and raid Galois that were, multi-day, multi-team type stuff. And you've probably seen some of those aired on TV. Like the world's toughest race was the last one we did was in Fiji. That was in 2019. And that's one of Mark Burnett, the guy who does, Survivor and stuff like that. That's his ballywig. That's how he got his start. So, um, I've sort of graduated into more disciplines, and that's always kept things fresh, other than just, doing the running exclusively. So, that's kind of a quick brushstroke of, some of my history, a short version of it.
My dog loves canned food. I feed him dry kibble, but I have to mix in some wet dog canned food. So from my dog's uh, point of view, thank you for your little part in helping manufacture canned
Sure.
canned food for dogs. You grew up in farm, Marshall. So I did read your most recent book, and it's fascinating. I wanted to ask you this: was there, let's say, a connection between your upbringing in a farm and being used to the physical order that it takes to be able to look after all the needs that a live farm has, and your ability to start running and take to it with that kind of ferocity? especially because you didn't even start running, from what I understand, until your 20s, which seems uh, a little different than so many of the world's best athletes begin their foray into the sport way early in their lives.
Yeah, so no, you're absolutely right. Growing up on a farm, we actually moved from the city to the farm when I was 5 years old. And um, I can remember even before we moved out into the farm, I was 5 years old and we had a black and white TV. So, this is 1956, for God's sake. And, Hillary had just climbed, Mount Everest a few years earlier. And for some reason, I tuned in and I saw these mountain climbers on this mountain, and here they were struggling to get up this mountain. And I saw their frostbitten hands, and they were having trouble with their feet, and they had to go down, and they're taking hauling bodies down and stuff like that. And I was so intrigued by that when I was 5 years old. And right then and there, I said to myself, I want to do that. I want to experience that. I want to see what that's like to be on a big mountain like that. And I was at 5 years old. Then we moved out onto the farm. And I think what that did is exactly what you're saying, where it gave me the ability to learn like a good work ethic. So we'd go out, take for instance, we're baling hay and stuff, and it was all done mostly by hand then. So, these balers would spit out a bale, and we'd have a sled that we'd ride on the back, and we'd have to make little stacks of hay, and then we'd shove them off. We'd stick a big bar into the ground, and it would push the little stack off that consisted of probably 30 or 40 bales of hay. And then we do the next one, and we do that all day long. So sometimes we'd be out there for 12, 14 hours doing it. And we always had like an old canvas container that held water, and it tasted terrible. It tasted like burlap, but that's what we used to drink out of. And we just hang it on the front of the tractor where the radiator was, and it would further cool it, and it would keep it cool in like 100-degree days. We'd have nice cool water. So we had to learn little tricks like that. And of course, we always had something to eat where, we'd have a little bag over on the side where we could grab a bite to eat while we were working in between bales and stuff like that. So what does it sound like? Exactly what you're thinking. We're out there doing exactly what you're doing when you're out running. You're just working hard, you're fueling yourself, you're hydrating, and it's a long day. You're on your feet all day. There's really no breaks that you can take unless you just stop the tractor. But it was essential that you got the work done because you only had a window of 2 or 3 days before the hay would dry out too much. So it's not much different than running. And I never thought of you know running was extraordinary or much different than just that farm labor that we would do on a daily basis. And we also dealt with a lot of cattle too. We had 80 head of Holstein cattle, so milking cattle. Some of them we did by hand and machines. So I got real familiar with fixing things and just doing things with animals. So when we this sort of segued into the adventure racing type things. I've been in Morocco riding camels. I've been, in Morocco also riding American, or excuse me, stallions, military stallions. So things like that. So I learned how to deal with livestock also. So all of that served me very well. So it was just a sort of a little snapshot, the farming, as to what I would be doing in the future, and I had a comfort level of being out in the environment that probably a lot of people don't have, and I think it made me a little bit more where I wasn't so fearful of the environment or getting out in the mountains or something like that, because it was just something that we did every day.
Marshall, as you were talking, I was just thinking of how farming has evolved so dramatically, where today's farming is so heavily mechanized. And the level of physical labor is certainly more than what a sedentary, let's say, a city worker does, but it's still quite different than the life you had, because you probably had the life of somebody growing up in a farm where you were up on your feet and you were working hard physically, but also exercising creativity and industry in looking after all the different things that your farm required you to. And I am sensing perhaps that once you left home and you started your own business, perhaps you had developed this appetite for day long physical endurance that maybe needed an outlet. And once you started running, you poured your heart and soul into it. Marshall, in your book, you spoke of this catalyst in your life that prompted you to put so much energy into running. Can you speak a little bit about what happened, and then how you found that fire to keep pushing yourself so quickly and so rapidly through the ranks of running?
It does go back to the farm where, I had a brother, he was a year older. And so, here I am, this younger brother. And what we do is we'd have contests as far as, who could put the most bales up in a day and stuff like that. So, we had little competitions of our own. I don't know if I was so much into the competition. Of course, I always enjoyed, there are times when I could win a race and things like that, or I've set records and so on and so forth. But I never thought too much about that. But I just enjoyed being out in the environment. So I think at an early age, that's what it taught me. I started driving a tractor when I was 10 years old. So more was expected of us, than what you would, I don't want to say that kids are coddled or anything. There's sort of a progression that is kind of a little bit slower where, you don't give kids so much responsibility. And I think that's good in so many ways. But, we had tons of responsibility very, very early. And I think what that taught me was kind of a focus of sorts, where in order to get things done during the day, we had to start early and we had to focus, and we had so much time to do this and this and this and this. So that may be where, I taught myself how to manage my time and, take care of myself so I could accomplish things, in very short order. So, being out there running and just going down the road and putting one foot in front of the other, it sort of equated to the same type of situation where I thought to myself, if I do this, I can shave off a few minutes. And I would pay attention to my body too. Take, for instance, out of Badwater. I've done that a number of times, and that's I set a couple of the records. I've won it a few times, but something as simple as, instead of running with your fist closed, I thought to myself, well, if I run with my hands open, there's a lot of skin area there, and so you can cool yourself more efficiently, just a small percentage. So, I learned to just shave, maybe minutes off of, 100 and, 30, 40 mile run just by doing little things, or that's what I theorize, because, it came to foot care, it came to this and that, but it's all sort of the same. And so I enjoy just thinking about those things while I was out there running, down the road. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I probably embellished a little bit too much.
Actually, one thing I was curious on is when you were in that form again, you were pushing your body, using your body in all kinds of ways, both by the demands of the work, but also maybe in some ways the creativity you and your brother had as young kids. Wondering why did you get pulled into running specifically and maybe not into something else? I mean, it could have been, you could have become a boxer or a power lifter, or found other ways to exercise your need and zest for physical exercise.
Yeah, and I think why I chose running is you're absolutely right. Running was so simplistic. It you know I only had so many hours in the day, so I didn't have time to go out and go to a gym. I didn't have time to do anything else but concentrate on getting my exercise in or whatever. And as I had mentioned, I was talking about my wife, and I had a job that was very demanding, and I was building the job when I was the business when I was 28 years old. So I really had to manage my time well. In fact, so much so that I never had any time to watch TV. So all of these old shows and things that were on TV back in the 80s and 90s, I never even saw them. I didn't have time for them. So running was essential to me, not only for my health, but I could fit that in my schedule where I could put on a pair of shoes, go out for,
Mm.
an hour run at any time during the day or night. So the gym didn't have to be open, this didn't have to, these circumstances. It's not equipment intensive. So, the beauty of it is the simplicity of it.
I have to agree with that. The simplicity and maybe even the efficiency of running is certainly so addictive. I am taking a break from running myself as I try to heal my injured knees, but I certainly miss that time in my life when I could maybe just leave my home before a flight and quickly get in a 30-minute rapid workout and come back. And you're right, all you need is a pair of running shoes. So that part is certainly incredible. Actually, one thing that struck me when you were speaking earlier about being mesmerized by the first ascent of Mount Everest. I am a few years younger than you are. So yeah, so they climbed Mount Everest a little bit before I was born, but I also grew up in the shadow of the Himalayas in India, and the idea of climbing, those towering mount peaks was probably was a big part of my fascination with the mountains, and why I wanted to also become, let's say, a better athlete, so one day I could go and climb some of those big peaks myself. Was that perhaps also part of your fascination and your, let's say, goal setting and drive to become a good runner at that time, so you could then at some point aspire to climb Mount Everest yourself, which you did? You went and climbed Mount Everest. You also climbed all the other summits across the continents. But I'm curious, when you started running, was there like a goal or an aspiration that, yes, today I am running maybe to Pikes Peak or doing some other, long run in my neck of the woods, but one day, if opportunity presents itself, I would like to go climb Mount Everest and maybe some other big mountain massives.
Yeah, I think that is true. I don't know if I consciously thought of that because I never really thought that I'd be able to travel that much and so on and so forth. But having said that, one of the reasons that I wanted to become a good runner is so that I could get my travel paid for, so that I would, and sure enough, it manifested itself that way when, I got a little bit of a reputation. Then I got, some invitations. Take, for instance, in the Himalayas, there's, a stage run that, Pandy is the director. It's called, I'm trying to think what it is, but it's Pandy is based in Delhi, and he's the race director, and he invited me over there. So I got to run in the Himalayas and other places too. And then it kind of segued into this adventure racing thing where we had sponsors such as DuPont, big sponsors that would pay for our team to travel all over the world. So I don't know if I consciously kept thinking about that goal of climbing Mount Everest, but it was always in the back of my mind, that it just sort of hangs in there and just it doesn't haunt you, but you think about it occasionally, and I guess that may, on some level, guide sort of your destiny to finally
Hmm.
get there and climb it. And running was just sort of a vehicle that fit into that picture, as well as the adventure racing. And then all of a sudden, here I am. Let's see, I think I finished climbing the seven summits. I was up on Everest, I think, when I was 52 or something like that. So it took me quite a while, and I had to delay that just a little bit, as well as running across America, which was one of my goals. I always thought that's sort of probably the ultimate running achievement, is to run a race that is multi day or week or months or whatever. It all kind of fit into the master plan, I guess you could say. So sometimes we're keenly aware of it, but sometimes I think we just kind of stay on that journey that guides us that direction. And we don't really know that we're going to get there, but eventually when we do, we kind of look back and it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that all happened. But I think if we're all persistent, and we do have that goal in mind, even though we may have thought about it years and years and years ago, if we really want it that badly, we're going to achieve it eventually.
Goals are perhaps so fundamental to our lives as humans. Those daily, short term, or maybe like some longer term goals are important. But I feel it's so vital to have that like grand, audacious goal, which is lurking somewhere in the deep recesses of our imagination, that maybe keeps subliminally guiding us in our day-to-day action. It's yeah, one might, I mean, you probably were not thinking about climbing Mount Everest or those 8 summits every day when you went for a run, but maybe somehow it was helping you eke out that little extra bit of performance, because you knew that maybe sometime down the line, a decade or two, you would need to be ready whenever that opportunity presented itself, and it did. Marshall, when did you actually, let's say, burst into public consciousness? I am aware of, let's say, some of your more landmark achievements. Running across America, it seems so mind boggling that it takes a little while to even wrap one's head around it. Was that one of your more noteworthy, let's say, feats that maybe allowed you to get sponsors, helped you carve a name for yourself, or were there things that you did before that which were just as impressive timeline wise? When did that happen versus when did some of your bad water runs happen, or were these happening across? So maybe just a quick timeline of like some of your uh, feats that you're more proud of.
Basically started running. This was, 1978, and then I jumped into ultra marathoning in 1986, and then I, heard about Badwater. At that time, there was only a dozen people that were even running it, if at that. So that was about 1990. The first year I went out, I finished second in that, and Tommy Possert, finished first. And then I set my goals on, I wanted to run a certain time, and I did run that time, even a little bit faster. It was sub 30 hours, but Tom Possert, ran it faster. So I thought to myself, I've got to kind of fine tune what I'm thinking. I want to run it not only to run a better time, but I want to run it to where, I'll actually win it. So that's kind of what I set my sights on. And then one of the fellas that was crewing for me early on, he, branding, everybody says about, they talk about branding and things like that. Well, that was sort of a key word or whatever that came about right about in, the late 80s or 90s, where people would brand themselves some way. And I can remember Scott Weber, who was crewing for me. He said, why don't you make this Badwater thing? Why don't you make that part of your branding? And of course, I'm saying, what the hell is branding? So anyhow, I thought about that, and I enjoyed running out in the desert. So the next year I won it, and then I won it two more times, and there were two of those times when I actually, set the record and then improved upon it the next year, and then I came back and won it in 1987 or something like that, and just kept doing it and doing it over and over and again to where, I had accumulated 20 finishes, and then I kept doing it outside of the window where I would do these sort of creative things like, can you actually run across the desert that 146 miles to the top of Whitney and carry everything from the start to the finish, including all your water, which was essentially 22 gallons of water I had calculated. Or can, I did this with a buddy, which was sometime later, where we did a circumnavigation where we buried over 30 caches and did the perimeter of Death Valley, which was probably the most dangerous thing that I've done, even more dangerous than the Everest for sure. So, that timeline just kept pushing itself, and I started creating all sorts of goofy little things, like people take, for instance, at Leadville, the Leadville 100. I'm sure you've probably heard about that. And, there was the Pikes Peak Marathon. And so people, they used to joke about, oh, they're on the same weekend. Ha ha. Why don't you go out and do them both? And I thought to myself, that's a great idea. So, you know, of course, I was the first to do that. It was on the same weekend. So I started Leadville, finished it, and I finished well with it. I think I had to run like 22 hours or something so I could get down to Pikes Peak, be at the starting line, which was on Sunday, and finish that on the same weekend. So, I was constantly trying to show people that they could do more. They could always do more. And to try and, like with the solo, be creative, do things that other people aren't doing. You don't have to always go to, a race and this and that to prove yourself, if you will. Just be a little bit creative. And that sort of fits in with having fun. And it's more of a challenge. And so, I just sort of thrived on that. So there was a period of 12 or 13 years when I would just try and go out, make it one of my missions to do something that nobody else had done, nobody else had even thought about. So, and there's guys that are doing that, even as we speak. But lo and behold, it always sort of puzzled me, because then sometimes these guys would call me up and they said, I'm gonna I'm gonna go out and try and break your record, and that could be for the Pikes Peak Marathon, and um, Leadville, or it could be, I was out there, I did a um,
Let's stick with
there was there
actually let's
was
stick with
there was
sorry, let's I was just going to
sorry.
say, let's stick with Badwater for a second. You have this history and this record of accomplishments with the Badwater race. It's an iconic race. As I was reading your fascinating book, it took me back to my own visit to Death Valley a few years ago. My friend Karen and I, over Thanksgiving, we took our road bikes and we did some cycling around this really fascinating part of the California landscape. The race is incredible, right? So, in your words, if you can describe what what the Badwater race is about, and also what was your fascination with this particular race, because you have, like you said, you have been able to add on to the core race with some of your own creative tangents. You talked about the circumnavigation of the race. Then you also talked about something which to me sounds absolutely incredulous. You did this Badwater quad. So you went up and down the race course. How would you describe the race to a layman? Because I can just visualize in my head, you and your pack of runners just running across Death Valley all the way up to Mount Whitney. So I can visualize that. But for somebody who's not been to those places, how would you describe what you were doing out there?
It's 135 miles to the portals, but like all 20 of my finishes of the official race that stopped at the 135, I continued on. So I always did the entire 146. So, for those people who don't know what that is, you go from minus 200 and I think it's 85 feet to the top of Mount Whitney, which is 14,505 or something like that. So there's a huge elevation gain. And what I enjoyed about it was that the temperature can vary almost close to 100 degrees from where you start. You could start when it's, say, 115, 120 degrees, and then when you get to the top of Mount Whitney, it can be below freezing, 20 degrees. So that, and the other thing that attracted me to it was the desert and, just the solitude of it, running out there. And of course, you've got a crew, but a lot of the time you're out there just by yourself. Or when I was doing this solo, with the cart, I was out there all alone by myself. So it's, more of a spiritual type thing, more of a pilgrimage. And, you're discovering about what makes you tick also. The majority of the race, that 135 miles, is on pavement, but then you kind of get onto the trail. There's 11 miles up, which is 146 miles. Then when you get to the top, you have to go back down to the portal. So there's another 11 miles that you tack on. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the variety of the terrain. I enjoyed the variety of the temperature, you don't see that many animals or anything like that, but the geography was fascinating. You go from different types of vegetation, and the other thing that is very attractive about it is that that is one of the few places that is really dark skies. So I mean, you get out there, halfway into the race, and you get up on some of these passes and stuff, and you can see all the stars are out. It's just, unbelievable. So much so that they even light the night up, even if there isn't a moon. So, it's more, I think, of a spiritual awakening. And, of course, people talk about the heat and they talk about the cold and elevation and how tough it is. For me, I tried to put it in perspective. And as long as, I was thinking of it as, some sort of a spiritual awakening, I felt it was just a great privilege to be out there and to be able to do it. And so, I just felt lucky that I could be out there doing that sort of thing. And it really, it wasn't that big of a deal as far as I was concerned. I still don't think it is. I think we were kind of built to do that sort of thing.
Mm,
As long as we can wrap our head around it. And that's what I encourage people to do, is just think way out of the box. And, if
mhm,
there's something that you don't think that you can do,
mhm.
you should at least go out and try it so you can get a taste of it. And maybe you'll come back and succeed. It's hard to explain. I think you just need to put things in perspective and not blow them way out of proportion.
Marshall, it's fascinating. I speak with athletes across these different outdoor genres who have, in some ways, redefined what is possible for us as humans when it comes to being able to push ourselves. But all of you have this ability to talk about it in this humble and matter of fact fashion. And I think this common thread also exists where people talk about just going out there and giving it a shot. I can't agree more. One has to go out there and try something and have the dream to go bigger, because I think that first step is what I think ignites that desire to take the second step, and so on and so forth. You used an interesting and evocative expression there. You talked about the spiritual nature of your experience as you were crossing through the desert. I would like to ask you this. Can you describe a moment when you were running across the landscape at Badwater, when the raw beauty, or let's say the sheer magnitude of the landscape, it overwhelmed you, and maybe how that experience impacted you and your ability to keep pushing your body through its apex?
Of course, I talked about the stars and stuff like that, and what that does is it sort of motivates you. It feels like you're a part of nature, and it's kind of a dichotomy because you feel like you're a part of nature, but then on the other hand, you feel like you're just a little speck in the universe also, which I've always enjoyed feeling that. Like you're something very insignificant, but you're out there doing something that you feel in yourself that you're doing that is significant. So there's that part of it where you sort of connect with the environment, connect with there's the stars out there, there's the pounding of your feet and just the sounds that are associated with it, or the lack of sound that is associated with that being out in the complete solitude, quiet of the desert. There's one instance that I had or experience that I had out in Badwater, and let's see, I'm trying to think. I was actually being I was actually being crewed, and it was during the race. I'm trying to think back, but it was between starting the race and about 30, 40 miles into it. The sun had set in front of me, and I was running toward Mount Whitney. And I can remember running during the night, and it got to the point where I was so mesmerized, almost disconnected with my own body, to where I actually experienced, and this is going to sound just really weird, and I'll kind of qualify this later in my explanation, but I had an out of body experience, and honest to God, this happened. And, about 30 miles into it, I see that sun go down in front of me. And it seemed like it was a matter of 10 or 15 minutes. And, my crew was going in and out, giving me water, doing stuff. They disappear in the distance. So I had an awareness of that, but it was secondary. But I was flying over myself, watching myself run, and I was running effortlessly. And the sun comes up behind me. I'm 50 miles down the road, and it's almost like I couldn't even figure out how I got there because the night had disappeared. And that whole time, it was more of, talk about a spiritual experience. It was just more of an out of body experience. So that happened, and I don't think I've ever so deeply connected with myself and the environment and that relationship where the two of them exist in that same space until, do you know who Janos Koros is? Who is, he holds all these magnificent records for 48 hours. He's a Greek, and he still holds world records, multiple world records. He came to Boulder, and I had the privilege of going to breakfast with him, and I was talking to him, and I said, Giannis, because I mean, this guy's, I mean, he's cut out of a way different mold than a lot of people. A lot of his records still exist, ultra records, like 6 day type things, 600 and I can't even remember, 40, 50 miles, whatever. But I asked him about that. I said, this is going to sound just like I said to you, really corny. And I said, I was out in the desert. I told him the same story that I just told you. And you know what he said? He said, you know what? It happens all the time to me. And I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, no, you know how I get there? And I said, no, don't you tell me. He said, you just have to squeeze everything out of you until there's nothing left. And then you get into this space where you can go there. So this guy does it regularly, or did it regularly. And it's always puzzled me how he could do that. And I'm not sure he could explain it other than what he just told me. You just have to, kind of get outside of yourself and you could do more.
Mm.
And the one thing I noticed, because I went back and I looked at some of his times and his pace, and you could see right when that happened, because he'd start running faster, 100 miles down the road or whatever, he'd start running faster. It was fascinating to have this conversation, and he's the only other person that I've has acknowledged that. So anyhow, yeah, that's kind of my story. But it was, quite extraordinary. And what I kept doing was going out to Badwater to see if I could duplicate that, and I never could. I've crossed the valley now 31 times, and I've never been able to do it again. It was like a fleeting moment.
Wow, Marshall, you were describing your otherworldly experience, and I was getting goosebumps. And yeah, I was going to ask you if being able to, let's say, tap into almost the supernatural in a way, if that has been, if that is more ephemeral, or you've been able to tap that into as a reliable strategy to helping you push through some of these extreme limits of what's possible. I have sometimes found that I don't know about being able to observe my body from afar, but I know that I've gotten, let's say, a kind of a second wind, to use a more mainstream expression. When I've also been heavily fatigued through, let's say, a long, long, long climbing day, but sometimes connecting with nature and connecting with the elements around me and connecting with my level of extreme fatigue allows me to find just that extra boost and maybe even magic to helping push through. I'm curious, do you find that a lot of us out there who are living on our day to day are able to find actually, let me rephrase that. I find that a lot of us out there are not able to find those rare but moments of pure magic. And I feel that maybe a lot of us are also leaving much on the table when we push ourselves physically, whether it's running or doing something else in the outdoors. Are there any strategies that you have found or you have advised people on, and how they can also just get just that extra bit of juice from ourselves on being able to push through those situations when one is combating what one might think is extreme fatigue, or that moment where one is like, oh my god, I cannot put another step forward, but somehow you have been able to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think what I'd like maybe how to address that is, I think the more that you do something, I think what you're not only doing is you're training your body, but you're training your mind to be able to accept, um, you know, distances, speeds, whatever it may be that you couldn't imagine that you could do, that you really can do. It's just that, you keep training yourself. And when you're training yourself, you're convincing yourself that you can do more and more and more and more. Um, which is, I guess, the way I'd like to put it is like, you find that other gear. So when you get in the moment where you may be really down or something, of course, my strategy always was to think, I just need to get down the road another 15 minutes or so, and it's going to be a completely different game. And sometimes there's such an elation when you get through that to where it allows you to keep pushing beyond that and even doing it more succinctly, better, faster, whatever. It's almost like a big sigh of relief. And when you arrive, you can do more. So yeah, I don't know if that's a good way to put it or not, but it's just kind of finding that other gear, but it's kind of getting through, grinding those gears for, trying to get into that gear. I don't know exactly how to put it, but I think you have to make, I think you have to be comfortable in your mind to where you can be comfortable being uncomfortable. I don't know how else to say it.
Certainly, I what I'm sensing is you have this level of, let's say, sincere curiosity about your own physical limits that you have attempted to explore throughout your career. Any advice again for the everyday athlete on how they can also perhaps develop that kind of curiosity of what they're capable of?
To put it simply, I think what really holds us back is, we can't be afraid to fail. And if, if we do fail, what I have found when I've failed is it allows me to do more. Um, I've learned more from my failures than I
Mm.
have my successes. It tells me more about myself. I think it strengthens, your mettle in life and things like that. So, what I would suggest to people is, don't be afraid of going out there because we're probably afraid of just failure or something like that. And so what? With, running in particular, there are fail safes. You can always quit. You can always bail out. And I don't even want to say quit because, if you do quit, you really haven't in the sense of the word because you've went
Hmm.
out there and you've towed the line and you've tried it, so you haven't failed. Maybe you quit, but you haven't failed. You may have succeeded in your own way, and you can build upon that. But just don't be afraid to go out there and try anything. Some people, I think what they do is they overthink things. Like take for instance with Badwater. Sometimes I'd start spinning it and I'd think to myself, oh, am I in good enough shape or, this or that, or, have I trained well? And so you start spinning things in your head or whatever. And I think what I learned to do out there after the first couple of times is don't even think about it until you get out there on the starting line. And then what are you going to do? There's nothing left but to put one foot in front of the other, and it'll just
Mm.
be okay. So, people just need to remind themselves that they'll be okay. Now, that's not the case with some of the things I'm sure that you've done and that, I have done where they're really hanging out there. And, I would say don't put yourself at risk, to where you're going to jeopardize your life or something like that. And sometimes, I've put myself in positions where that has happened, but we have to think more about just us also. One of the reasons I didn't climb Everest for until I was, in my 50s was because I had kids. life is bigger than just us.
It is certainly a privilege. I think end of the day, just being able to go out there and push ourselves. You, me, for using maybe an analogy that you cited, we are not working at a farm when we're doing these outdoor sports. We are not trying to feed ourselves. We're looking for, let's say, something higher up in Maslow's hierarchy. Talking of failure, you said something very interesting, which is you have learned more from your failure than from your successes. I think I can't agree more, and many of the listeners will agree as well. But perhaps maybe an example, Marshall, of a failure. It doesn't have to be an event, or it could be just a, yeah, it could be another, it could be a physical event, or it could be just another facet of your life where this failure has taught you the most.
My children, I've got three kids. They're all grown up, of course. Some are, approaching 50 years old, and the youngest, I think, is in her mid 30s. On some level, I think to myself, I failed them because when I was out doing some of these things and leaving them alone, and sometimes putting myself at risk, which I discussed before. So I would look at that as a failure of sorts. But the good news is that it's not too late. And now they're having grandchildren, and I can now it's an opportunity for me to prove myself again or improve upon what I didn't do, but connect with them. So, we have opportunities in our life all along, and it could be, very physical things. It could be connecting with our family, which are more of an improvement for everybody's mental state. So, that's one of the failures, that I think back, I should have been, spending more time, paying more attention to them. Well, now's my opportunity. So, I can redeem myself.
Certainly. Well, I mean, you have the humility to at least accept it, and the awareness that while pushing yourself and maybe using your gifts and your focus, taking that to its zenith, there's perhaps been an opportunity to add more balance now in these decades of your life. Another thing that you pointed to was about just risks that you took with yourself physically, right? Like you, when you were doing these events, sure, there wasn't the risk of, let's say, extreme death, perhaps. Perhaps with running, there wasn't. No, sorry, not extreme death, immediate death. But you were pushing past the boundaries of, let's say, pain and discomfort. And do you think what you did was correct? So, for example, you spoke of when you were running across America, which I think I think sometimes it's important to put things in perspective because it's so hard for people to grasp that. So, you were doing, let's say, the equivalent of two marathons plus every day for like 50 plus days, and you were running on the road a lot, which can be even more taxing on one's limbs. You experience pain, and you went through some almost to the dark side of what you can endure. So I'm just curious, like, how far did you actually push yourself, and do you think you might have perhaps caused some irreversible damage by pushing that far?
The answer is yeah, probably. And, um, okay, so yeah, you had said, maybe it's a gift or whatever. You can push yourself beyond what other people can do, and so on and so forth. And this is addressing what you're saying. So the example that I would use, I got 1,200 miles, across the U.S. and um, 400 miles earlier, I started experiencing pain. I had a plantar fasciitis, So I switch over to Crocs, and for that day, I only got 50 miles in. And incidentally, when I would get uh, less than 60 miles in a day, it was almost a disgrace in my mind that I had just let myself down, doing less than 60 miles a day. So, it was hard for me to deal with, but, I had brainwashed myself so thoroughly that anything short of that was unacceptable. So it's kind of an interesting thing psychologically, but I had continued on that foot, and then I got a lateral tear in one of the tendons on that same foot when I was in Sterling, Colorado. Fast forward 1,200 miles down the road. So they take x-rays and stuff like that, or did an MRI, and they said, you've got a torn ligament and stuff. And so I'm talking to the doctor, and I said, well, what do I do, doc? And he said, well, you ice it, you elevate it, you rest, you do this. In other words, he's saying you probably better quit. And I said, well, how does that look? And he just goes on about, just kind of bagging it. I said, well, how about if, for the next couple of days, I do like 50 miles a day or something? Would that constitute rest? And he just looked at me, rolled his eyes, and, it was the funniest damn thing. But then what I did is I got out, headed down the road, and my foot was bothering me. In fact, we had a bucket of ice or whatever, and we'd wrap it in ice. And, we do this a few times a day just to kind of, put it in perspective and keep the swelling down and enable me to keep going. But it was painful. And so I thought to myself, and this had happened to me out in Death Valley when I was doing that quad where, I was having extreme problems, and all I could focus on was that pain. It was like the center of my universe. And I thought to myself, I don't know if I can, don't think I can go on, running across the US if I don't, do something about this. And so the trick I used was I disowned my foot. I just looked down at it, and I kept saying to myself, this foot does not belong to me. This is not who I am. This is not. And I kept going on and on. And so I essentially, in my mind, just disconnected from that. And it served me well in that I could keep going, but it never got any worse. It never got any better. It was the same thing. So I kept icing, I kept treating it, as best we could.
You definitely flouted your doctor's advice. Your doctor, I think you probably, I don't know, but maybe you were such an extreme case that maybe your doctor in some ways wasn't like as well informed on
Yeah,
how best to advise you, given some of the things you've accomplished are beyond
right.
comprehension for many of us. And then the second thing, which is very interesting, is the strategy that you developed of like dissociating with a part of your body. It sounds kind of nuts, but I think it's one of those, maybe you just have to be in that situation to follow it. I know that this has happened where I sometimes get cramps while I'm climbing, and it could be for all kinds of reason, dehydration, or so when my fingers may not like close down on, let's say, a grip. And sometimes if I'm not able to finish a route, I'm high up somewhere in the Sierras, it can have some, like, let's say, serious consequences. So anyway, I have a way that I haven't been able to articulate it the way you have, but I think it's a way of just almost like a combination of ignoring and focusing on the task at hand, combined with some kind of like will that I find to just keep moving, and the hand
Right.
will keep functioning even though on one hand it feels like I can't close my hand, but at the same time I'm able to like somehow will it to keep functioning. So it can, maybe our bodies have a way, our mind and body have a way of like pushing beyond what seems possible and finding reserves, which don't seem rational when you try to talk about it, but somehow we are able to go to that point.
Right. So, years ago, there was uh, a SEAL team out of California, and one of the trainers, he came to me and he said, can you talk to my recruits? So what I did is I developed the 10 commandments of endurance with them in mind. And I can't tell you exactly what they are. I've got them written down. It may be in one of my books. I can't even remember. But one of the things that addresses this very subject is accepting your fate. So take, for instance, when you're hanging on that wall and your fingers are like that, it's not normal. It's not, but it's a fate, and you just accept it. You have to deal with it now. So that's kind of what was happening with me. I just accepted my fate that was, and I was able to disown it. But I just remembered too. This is the part of the question that I was addressing. Did it cause any sort of physical damage? And that foot is a little bit bigger. It still swells. It still hurts sometimes. And this is, God, I did that in 2009. So it's been a long time. It's been 16, well, yeah, 16 years or whatever. And yeah, it still affects me. Yeah. And my biomechanics were a little bit wacko. I've had a hip replaced. So,
Mm.
who knows? So it can manifest itself in sort of ugly ways, if you will.
Marshall, given that you still have lingering, let's say, injuries from that epic race, and I think maybe you have said this somewhere that that run across America, and then also all of your runs at Badwater and outside, they might have actually shortened your lifespan by maybe a couple of years and whatnot. Knowing all of that, if the clock was to be reversed, would you still choose to undertake those races and those feats?
Okay, this goes way back to when I lost my first wife when I was 30 years old to cancer. And, I started running 2 years before that. And I said to myself, and it's unrealistic, but I thought to myself, it's kind of survivor's guilt where I thought to myself, I could die tomorrow. So my motto became as far as I can, as fast as I can. And what that means is I'm going to cram everything I can into the time that I've got. So, here I am, 73 years old. She died when she was 30 years old. I've outlived her by 43 years now. I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, I've lived such a full life right now, and I've probably got another 20, 30 years to go. I have no idea. But we can't control our destinies. I think what we have to do is use it to its fullest advantage given our capabilities, and that means using our, what are the words that I'm looking for? We have to maximize uh, what we can do well to the fullest extent. Live our lives to the fullest extent. And our, the span of our life isn't so terribly important. So, those memories I have from way back then, doing that stuff. And we've this is a little bit presumptuous, but I think we influence other people with the things that we do, and they look at the things that we do, and they may idolize it, and they say, "Gosh, I wish I could do that." Well, maybe it gives them a foothold to do exactly what they were meant to do in their lives that would
Mm,
enrich their lives. And once again, it doesn't matter how long that life is, but they went out and did it. So that's kind of the point of it.
that was powerful. Yeah, finding one's purpose and honoring that purpose is perhaps in many ways the most important thing that we
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
as humans. Actually, on a more fun note, Marshall, that run across America, for 50 plus days, you were out there running long, long distances, running through the day. Curious, how were you staying fueled? What were you eating? What were you drinking? How were you staying nourished? And what did you learn about your ability to manage your bodily needs through that event?
Nutrition to me is not rocket science. We all have to take care of ourselves. There's things that we all know you shouldn't be eating, things that are super, super like fat or, whatever. I don't restrict my diet for the most part, and that includes for when I'm out there running, which, my diet can completely change from what I normally eat. Take, for instance, when, I was on Mount Everest. I don't really like Red Bull. They don't sponsor me, but I saved a quart of Red Bull because I knew when I got up that last day on Everest, that's what I'd want because I, crave that at times when I wouldn't even think, of craving it. So I had a quart of Red Bull and, it worked out perfectly. So running across America, the beauty was every mile or two, I could just eat a little handful of something. So they had all sorts of things that they would bring me out, and whether it be pizzas or whatever, it was just normal food. Not only that, when I was drinking, whatever I drank had to have calories in it because I was burning anywhere from 7 to 8,000 calories, sometimes 10,000 calories a day. The first, I think, 6 days, I ran 70 miles a day. So, it takes a lot of calories. And so I was eating and drinking, like I was drinking juices, things like that. Sometimes, like in the morning, I'd start out with just eggs and bacon and, usually banana bread. And that would be the first full meal that I would eat. Then I'd get out on the road, and every mile to a mile and a half, say, they bring out something to eat. And they were so good at being consistent about doing that. And I was consistent in eating just those little snacks, whether it's potato chips or, whether it's a piece of a hamburger or, some, vegetarian type stuff, whatever it is, I would eat it. And usually it had to have more fat in it, a little more salt in it. So it would balance things out. Um, and at the end of the day, they did such a good job that I could just jump in bed and go to sleep and wake up the next morning, eat that breakfast, and then start again. So I didn't eat any real meals except that breakfast, to start with. And I might add, from start to finish, I only lost 4 pounds. So they were doing something right.
Yeah, they were, and maybe you were as well, by finding a way to consume so many calories. Sometimes it's not that easy. We think that, yeah, I love to eat, but when I'm out there on a full day of climbing, somehow I don't have the appetite because I'm just focused on something else, and I forget to eat, and then I can crash. I just one other question on the subject of food. You grew up in a farm, and you grew up close to where our food comes from. Wondering if that has played an impact on your food and nutrition choices. And I ask that because most of us these days in the Western world are not close to where we get our food. We shop for our food from stores, and we eat at restaurants, and we are far removed. And I'm curious if that impacts the choices you make every day as a consumer now, on what you eat and where you eat at.
Yeah, I think it does from the standpoint that, I tend to look at, some of the ingredients when I pick up a package or something like that. And I look at, whether it has, whether it's a protein or whether it's a carbohydrate, so on and so forth. So, I do look at that, and I think it does come from, being on the farm. We would process almost everything ourselves. we would separate the milk and we'd get cream and we'd get this and then we'd, butcher hogs and, whatever. And we'd go out and, we had a vegetable garden. So we do everything ourselves for the most part. There's very few things that we would buy from the store. And I think that sort of carries over. And I think what it also does is it allows me to, I think a lot of the diets today, and I don't mean this in a bad way or anything, but I think with slick marketing, they can get us to buy and eat a lot of things maybe we shouldn't be eating or of no benefit. And I do look a lot at or listen to, scientists about, what is good for us and what is bad for us, and even vitamins and things like that. But if we're eating a well balanced diet like we did out on the farm, we weren't taking vitamins and stuff because we were getting everything that we needed, from our diet, and it served us well.
And perhaps you have developed an intuitive sense of what your body needs. I get my blood tested, whatever, a couple times a year just to see what I'm deficient in. And I think the main thing that I am is usually always vitamin D. And I'm
Ah,
sure if I was
ah,
out on a farm all day, then I probably would have gotten some sunlight and been able to not be deficient.
what is a good source of vitamin D?
I take vitamin D3 supplement. I started that about a year ago. That's what I do. And I got tested again recently, so I was no more deficient in vitamin D. So I feel good that I'm able to get past that.
So what food does is associated with vitamin D then, instead of like just a vitamin
So
or something?
yeah, I'm sure I can. I'm sure that there are foods out there. I probably shouldn't,
Yeah,
opine top of my head, but I'm sure there are many foods. If I change my nutrition intake and did some very specific things, I'm sure I could do that
sure.
with
Yeah.
food as well.
Yeah, I used to, they do tests out at Badwater and stuff like that. And because of, the heat and everything, I'd always be a little bit low on magnesium. So I'd have to supplement myself with magnesium. And by the way, magnesium is not a soluble. So you have to be careful about how much of that you take.
Mm.
Now, calcium and magnesium and calcium work together, for the firing of the heart and the muscles and stuff like that. It helps them expand and contract muscles. So, that's why they're important. But one is a soluble, which is calcium, but then magnesium is not. So, we just have to be careful. And then, of course, sodium is the key one that keeps us from, or kept me from cramping. So, I would be sure and take a lot of salt, which I normally don't. I don't really salt things that much. So, anyhow, when you're out there doing stuff, all bets are off. You have to really pay attention, as I'm sure you're aware of what you eat, so you're getting what you need. And so maybe let that be the guide.
Marshall, getting back a little bit to some of your running performance and how it relates to aging, a lot of us are fascinated by the fact that you were out there doing some of these uh, really big things in your 40s and your 50s, maybe even later. And curious, what was maybe, let's say, the median age of some of those events when you were doing them back in the day? And then do you think that you surprised many people by being able to win some of these things and realize some of your records in those years?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to answer specifically, or I'm not sure I know exactly what you're getting at, but
Let me try to
I,
rephrase. Should I? Maybe I'll
I,
rephrase the question a little bit.
okay.
Y- What was, let's say, the median age of some of the events that you were participating in winning? And were you, let's say, around that, or were you older than the person next to you at, let's say, Badwater or Leadville or? or even the
Yeah.
eco challenges?
Yeah, and I think that varies with each person. Take, for instance, I always felt like I kind of peaked mentally and physically at 42 to 44 years old, but then I was able to perform well, well into, my 50s, basically. As I was saying, I was up on Everest when I was 52 years old at the top. So I was doing that. This last eco challenge that I did, I was 67 or 68 years old.
Wow.
And that's a 300-400 mile race.
So,
So
what allowed you, Marshall? What do you think allowed you to be able to realize some of these audacious things way past what you consider to be your physical and mental peak? Let's say you said maybe mid 40s, but then you were doing these things in your 50s. What can we learn from that?
I think, first of all, it's like with anything that we do, you have to have a desire to do it. So if, as we get older, I you had mentioned it early on, where you said, what's that fire in your belly or whatever, what turns you on? And it's, for me, I think a lot of it was showing other people that, it's okay. And I'm running alongside of them at Badwater, and I'm 60 years old, and I'm running alongside of a person who's 30 years old. And um, I think a lot of it is mental, but I think a person really has to have a burning desire to go out there and keep doing things. And so
Mm,
I think the way that you do that is, and you had mentioned it also, we all have to have our goals, set goals that are realistic. And maybe they're, I can't do what I used to do. My pace is probably 30 or 40% less than what it used to be, but I still have the desire to go out there. And for what reason, I'm saying, I'm not quite sure. I'm motivated. There's a good and a bad. I'm probably motivated in a good way, in that I know it's going to keep me healthy and stuff like that. And I'm motivated to hang on to youth, so that's kind of the double-edged sword. I know I'm
mm,
getting old, and I'm not willing to accept that. So, I think everybody deals with age differently, but for me, it's that's how I compartmentalize it. And take, for instance, I've had a couple of back surgeries, one about a year ago and one just a couple of weeks ago, where I have, stenosis, which, is clamping down on the nerves. And so my leg goes numb and stuff like that. So, and this kind of fits into where you were talking about, have I done things that, where I've sustained injuries that are long term? Well, I think that farm life early on, I can remember injuring my back when I was 12 or 13 years old. And it's exactly where this is. And I just kind of let it go and let it go and let it go. So those injuries were, sustained long ago. I guess, I just, I can't, I can't accept that I'm getting old. And I'm not sure I want to now. Um, but I'm just facing mortality, and so maybe some of it drives me in a positive way. I don't know if it's positive or
mm.
negative.
For sure, I can imagine that there's maybe this some sort of uh, mental struggle in being able to reconcile, but also keep pushing against. And maybe that balance keeps changing on a daily, monthly, annual level on what you think is correct versus what you think one still wants to keep eking out of oneself. You talked
Mhm.
about a couple of injuries. You talked about some big operations that you've had to go through. How has your training shifted? Because back in the day, you were just putting on so many miles on the track. And I'm curious, are you doing some things differently with your running and training at 73?
Oh yeah, I'll go out and like there's no reason, really good reason for me to go out and do a whole lot of speed work. Not that I ever did. So yeah, I back that off. I don't do as many miles because what's the point of it? As long as I can maintain, a fitness level that I'm comfortable with, all that changes. I'm probably training 20% of what I used to. I mean, there were when I was for take for instance trying to run across the U.S. or running across the U.S. My training miles going into that sometimes were 200 miles a week. There's no reason for me to go out and do that. So when I say 20%, that can mean 10 or 20 miles a week. And, that suits me just fine. Plus, I don't do that much actual running now. I do a lot more like speed walking and hiking up hills and stuff, which, keeps me fit. So, it's changed dramatically, just accepting what I can do and moving forward with that.
What about some of the training that you're doing off the track? Do you have a mobility practice? Do you do some other things with, let's say, the weight room that allows you to supplement and stay healthy?
Yeah, so I don't like to really get into a gym, but you have these like stretch bands and stuff like that. So I use that for strengthening, and a lot of that was the rehab that I was doing for coming off of hip replacement and back surgery and stuff like that. And I always used to do a fair amount of stretching, but I do much more stretching now to remain or flexible, to keep my flexibility. So I think those two things, and then just going out and walking or running. I never did do that many weights or anything, but those two things, the bands are nice and stuff like that. Plus, of course, just what I was saying, the flexibility I think is huge now for me. Just remaining, I think yoga is good too. At one time, I was doing some yoga, and I think it's excellent.
Marsh, it's funny. I just got diagnosed with hip dysplasia. I've had some
Mm.
hip issues. My hips were like in some pain, and I'm guessing I'm 46. I'm guessing I probably am looking at some kind of a hip replacement in the next couple of decades. Any advice you have for me to try to keep my hips as healthy as possible, given that I also have a little bit of a penchant for being outside and doing sports?
Yeah, if there's, I think you just have to pay attention to your bottom uh, biomechanics more than anything, and keep those, like, if it's your shoes or whatever it is, or if you have to use something else like a hiking pole to kind of help you out or whatever. But some of it is just genetic, and I will say this, as far as surgeries are concerned, I mean, the hip replacement, I don't think I was down for a couple of weeks and I was right back on it. That's not that big of a deal. You had mentioned also knees. Knees are a much, more difficult subject to address, and I've never really had any trouble with my knees miraculously. So, I think a lot of it is just genetics, doggone it. And I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah, I mean, it's some of it's just kind of out of our control, I'm afraid.
Totally, totally. Here's a listener question from Eddie from Virginia. Is there an adventure that was on your list that you never got around to tackling, Marshall?
Oh, well, I suppose there's a lot of them. I'm pretty happy with what I've done in the past. Yeah, gosh, that's a really good question, because every once in a while something will pop in my mind, but I don't think there's, I kind of did everything that I wanted to do, and I still have goals. Like, I have favorite mountains. Like, one of the things that I never got around to doing that I really would have liked to have done, and there's still a slim possibility, and that would be to climb Kilimanjaro once again with my kids. And they're older too, so I have to. So I think it's one of those things. I just want to do some of those things where I can connect with my family, and if I can involve one of my sports to make that happen, that's great. If not, that's okay too.
My dad is your age, and climbing Kilimanjaro is also on his bucket list.
Sure.
And he hasn't talked about it for a while, so I think this is a good reminder for me to go, nudge him a little bit on how is his preparation for that going. Maybe just a couple of final questions, Marshall, before we end this conversation. What might be a significant habit or behavior in the last, let's say, 5 years that has most impacted your life?
Wow. You know, that's a good question because when I lost my first wife, it was devastating, and I didn't know how to grieve essentially. So I struggled for 20 years, and a lot of what I did with the running and stuff was to just, you know, I was kind of in a survival mode. And, Heather, who I'm married to now, we've been married 22 years. I mean, she helped me work through some of that stuff. So that was the most devastating, and everything else just kind of pales. But things happen in our lives. For me, I think just, having like the hip and the back and not, recovering exactly as I would like to have seen it, that's been hard for me because I've had to just back off, my activities. And, that doesn't always suit me very well. I'm just not a couch potato. So, that's probably been the toughest in the last 5 years, just having to deal with, mitigating medical things going on.
Talking of medical things, one other thing that I wanted to ask you is, you, I believe, witnessed a friend of yours going through mental illness. And I'm curious on what you learned about observing your friend going through that, on our ability as humans to withstand something so devastating, and the power of the outdoors and of the vitality that comes with exercise to be able to push through that kind of challenge.
Yeah, so the friend that you're speaking of has Alzheimer's, and he actually did that last eco challenge with his son, and the two of them are featured in that. It's called the world's toughest race. I don't know if any race is the world's toughest, but it's damn tough. I mean, exponentially, it's a lot harder than running Badwater because you're out there doing all sorts of different things. But he was able to participate in that, having been diagnosed with Alzheimer's a couple of years earlier. He's doing okay, but we lose a little bit of him every day. And you hit on something that is very important because initially they had told him that it was an aggressive type of Alzheimer's and that potentially he could only live 2 or 3 years. And here we are 6 years later. And part of that is his success at staying sharper for a longer period of time was, he would go out with other people. I would take him out, 2 or 3 times a week, and we would get out on trails that he was familiar with. And it, I believe it improved his life exponentially, so much. Um, and in the book that I sent you, Both Feet on the Ground, that's the emphasis of the book, is to, put down the gadgets, get out. And that book came out And it was coincidentally just when we were in the middle of the pandemic. And I noticed that people were sort of quarantined to their houses. They weren't going out that much. When they did, they'd have masks. And I think getting outside was so incredibly healing for them. So, one of the things I say in that book is, if you can get outside, frequently and stay outside as long as you can. And that is, what heals the body, what mends the soul, and what makes us whole. Anyhow, I don't know if I've really addressed that, but it's kind of devastating for him because I did 8 of the eco challenges, and these are these 300-mile races. So we spent a lot of time together. These are, 7 to 10 day races. He was my best friend, and just seeing, it's a big loss, and every day but what it does do is it points out how fragile and precious that life is, and that once again we should make the most of it while we can, because we're all destined to die. I hate to put it so brutally, but that is the truth.
A few years in, your friend is maybe proving the doctors wrong in a way as he continues to maybe push past his illness to some degree. Do you think being outside and continuing to indulge in sometimes things as audacious as eco challenges, do you think that can actually prolong his not just his lifespan but also his health span?
Oh, absolutely, there's no question about it. He's probably remained twice as sharp for twice the amount of time, and has stayed. He's There's nothing wrong with his health. I mean, he is as fit as can be. He still does
Mm.
repeats. He can go out on a hill that he's familiar with, and he doesn't get lost, but he just goes out and he does repeats for an hour going up and down this half-mile long hill. That is, I can't tell you, that is his world now. And it's something he's familiar with, and it's something he's comfortable with. And that is his goal, to go out and do that, every day essentially. So, it's and it allows him to get out into nature and connect. And that's what we were doing, these eco challenges, for that very reason. So he's still able to connect with that, and he's familiar with that, even though he's lost a lot of other um, acquisitiveness, within his mind. That's the proving of how he's getting through this and continues to remain healthy on some level in his mind.
Good luck to your friend, and certainly points to how being outside is just so vital to us as
Yeah.
humans.
Yes.
Marshall, yeah, and maybe just one final question. If there was a big billboard out there on the freeway, what message would you like to leave for the world out there?
Wow. That's a really good question, especially putting the enormity of that, because it's out there for everybody to see. And hmm, yeah, and I'm just trying to think this through, because I mean, boy, we're living in a time where people are sort of pushing against each other, and it's going to sound really corny, but I think more than anything, I think we just need to love ourselves and love others, and support others. I don't know how you put that in a succinct message, but I mean that, you
No,
know,
I think that sounds great. Powerful. Love yourself and love others. I mean, it's sometimes, yeah, it's sometimes the simple things can be the most powerful. So I think that message is a strong one.
hmm, well, thanks. Yeah.
Marshall, you have written two amazing books. I just read the most recent one. We will put links to both those books on the show notes so people can go and find your books. Where else can people find you if they want to learn more about you and maybe any upcoming projects that you would like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, so what they can do is, of course they can get the books on Amazon. It's just marshallulrich.com. And, I'm really bad about updating that website, but you probably, see more than you want to know about me there. Um, but I guess the most interesting thing the last couple of years, and we're going on our third year, is the Route 66 Ultramarathon, which is 140 miles from Seligman, Arizona to Topak 66, which is on the Colorado River. And that is part of that section of Route 66 is the longest intact section of Route 66 that exists in the world. And so, and incidentally, the Bunyan Derbies that ran across the U.S. in 1928, they took part on that very stretch, a piece of that they were running on in 1928. So it's very, very historic. But yeah, that's what we're doing. It's called the Route 66 Ultra Run. So they can just look up Route 66 Ultra Run and they'll see it.
Sure.
Um, that's coming up, in November, the first part of November, and so people can sign up and they can do it as a relay. They can do it as an individual that's crewed, and also this year we've opened it up to a journey runner, where we'll kind of help them out here and there, but they can go out there and do it essentially on their own using, a lot of carrying a little bit more water and food and stuff like that, but we've got a number of divisions where just about we call it's a race for everyone anyhow, and it is. Case in point, there was one fellow who went out there last year and he hadn't even done anything so much as a 5K, nothing, and he finished the race. It was
What?
unbelievable. So yeah, it kind of fits in with what we've been talking about. If you can, what I like to say is, if you can dream it, you can do it. Don't limitate what you can do out there. There's no limitations. The only limitations are in your mind.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ageless Athlete Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this show just as much as I enjoyed creating and producing it. Whether you are an athlete looking to push your limits or someone striving to maintain a healthy, active lifestyle as you age, there is always something new to learn. From Ageless Athlete, we bring you a fresh episode each and every week. If you liked what you heard, we would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you really liked what you heard, please leave us a review, crush those 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. It helps us reach more people who are passionate about staying strong and resilient, no matter their age. Don't forget to visit our website and leave your email so I can send you occasional insights, stories, and tips to keep you inspired and motivated on your journey. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ageless Athlete Podcast and on YouTube at Ageless Athlete Podcast as well for even more great content. All of these links are available on the show notes for this episode. This show is entirely produced by me, Kush Khandelwal, based out of California with the help of my trusted adventure pup Roger. Until next time, keep challenging yourself. Keep pushing those limits. Stay mentally and physically fit. Continue doing what you love to do. And my friends, stay ageless.